Nice. So, what's with your mug over there?
Yeah, it's a Galapagos mug from the Galapagos Islands.
Oh, very cool. Have you been there?
No, I haven't been to Ecuador, which is where the Galapagos Islands are. But my roommate back in university is from Ecuador. So when she went back to visit her family, she brought a mug back with her for my birthday.
Oh,
so,
that's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really nice. And she's one of the people who helped to solidify my Spanish while I was in uni.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
And what mug do you have there?
I have one from the Quahana Lodge. So this is a bar and grill that's up in the northern part of Pennsylvania. And my parents had a little cabin out there, like with no electricity, no indoor plumbing. But this like was just on the road. So sometimes when you got tired of like barbecuing, we go down there. Okay. And the first time we went, they were so happy to meet my parents, their daughter, and my husband, that they gave us some mugs to remind us of our little visit.
That's so cute. I love that. Yeah. And I'm just so happy today because it's just so good to be back. We've got episode 1 in the books. We're real podcasters.
We're real live podcasters. It's so exciting. This is something we dreamed about for so long, and we just it's so much fun. I had so much fun.
It really is. It really is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and now we can say that we are podcasters on our resumes. When you're on like the plane and they ask you your occupation, you can check podcaster. So
yeah, just like add that in there. Like throw it into different conversations.
Oh yeah, did you know that I'm a podcaster? Oh, it's very exciting. Very cool.
And also, Sarah, did you notice that I use the expression in the books?
Oh, that's right. The first episode is in the books.
Yep. So that reminds me, listeners, make sure you keep an ear out for other words and expressions we're going to use in this episode. The specific ones are make a mistake, wean off, and figure out.
Okay, so make a mistake, wean off, and figure out. And what should we be doing with those words?
Well, you can take those words, you can write them down in your vocabulary notebook or write them down on a piece of paper that you'll keep saved. And you can go in and look up their definitions, listen to how we use them in the podcast, and figure out what they mean.
Yeah, so last week we had nitty gritty, rely on, and commute. And if I remember correctly, at the last episode of the season, we're going to put together all the words that we've done this whole season and put together a crossword so we can play with these words, these new vocabulary words and new expressions.
Exactly.
It sounds really cool. Very good.
All right. Well, last time we covered how important it was to spend 20 minutes a day doing something that you like to do, but in your second language.
Yeah, your second, your third, your fourth. Right?
Yes, and it's good for the brain because consistency is key. Because a little bit every day is much more powerful than a lot in 1 or 2 blocks, right?
It's so true. It's so true. And today we're going to go over some tips and tricks to use when you're in learning mode. Not when you're just relaxing and want to relax. You can be in your first language for that. But when you're in learning mode, we're going to show you some great things that you can do.
So, you've got 20 minutes on the clock, Sarah?
I sure do.
All right. Your 20 minutes starts now.
So last episode, we covered why it's important to spend 20 minutes a day doing something that you like to do, but in your second language.
Yes, it's good for the brain. I was listening.
You certainly were.
And we talked about how consistency is key. A little bit every day is so much more powerful than 1 or 2 blocks every other month.
Exactly. Like anything that you do to learn any skill, whether it's athletic, whether it's instrumental, if you're learning a craft, anything you have to do, like you have to do little bits all the time instead of big chunks very rarely. But today we're going to go over some tips and tricks to use when you're in that learning mode, when you really want to learn and not just relax, but to learn.
So, without further ado, you got 20 minutes on the clock, Sarah?
Yep, I do.
All right. Your 20 minutes starts now.
So, Erin, last time you mentioned that you're learning Spanish, French, Tagalog. What else are you learning, and what tricks and tips have you discovered while you've been on these language journeys?
Yes, I think that about covers it right now.
3 is enough.
Yeah. But honestly, speaking, I
Mhm.
really had to get over the perfectionist tendencies I have when learning a language, because for some reason I got it into my head, this idea that everything that left my mouth had to be absolutely perfect, right?
Mhm.
But it's hard enough in your first language to do that, and it's downright impossible in your second or third or fourth language, right?
Mhm.
You're constantly thinking as a learner, is the noun masculine? Is it feminine? Is it neutral, right? In some languages, what verb tense are you going to use? How can I formulate this verb once I find the verb tense I want to use, right? There's just so much that can go wrong, and
It's so true.
you have to do it all in real time. You don't
Mhm.
get to correct your little speech bubble that you have in front of your head, and say, oh, nope, it should be that instead of this, right?
Mm.
And honestly, a huge thing, like a huge helpful thing that I've been telling myself is that I'm aiming for communication, not perfection. And honestly, I tell my clients that too.
Yeah, communication, not perfection, and with the goal of connection.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, I love
I
that.
I really saw this a lot when I was learning French. There really was like two groups I found, like two extremes, because we were like a group of like 30 people from around the world learning French, and some people wanted to be perfect and were really good at writing, but they couldn't speak because they were too afraid of making mistakes. And then there were those who were just out there making friends, making jokes, listening to the radio, and they didn't care about making mistakes. They didn't get all tied up about it and worried about it. And I've found that they were learning French so much quicker than those who were focused on perfection. And one thing that I really noticed was that after a beer or two, you stop worrying about making mistakes and you just get over that inhibition right away.
Yeah, one of my clients and I, we have this running joke, and we call alcohol liquid courage.
It's great. Liquid courage.
But while it might give you that extra boost, we can't, in good conscience, encourage everyone to speak under the influence.
Nope,
You
we're
never
not.
know what you might say, right?
You might not. We're not. Just might not know what comes out of your mouth. It's
So,
true.
yeah, our best tip for speaking, therefore, is just do it. And no, we're not sponsored by Nike, right?
Just do
It just
it.
happens to be a very helpful phrase, right?
Yeah.
Just speak. So find
Mhm.
a native speaker who wants to learn your language, do an exchange. Maybe you know somebody who's willing to just talk to you in their language, right? Who knows?
Yeah, and next episode, we're going to talk about some applications that allow you to match with someone who wants to learn your language and you want to learn their language so that you can become language partners. So that we'll look at that next time. So, but on the other side of this coin of speaking is listening. You can't have a true conversation without also understanding what the person says to you, and it can't just be one-way street of you speaking. And I have this a funny thing that happened to me the last time I was in the Dominican Republic. And my Spanish, I'm sad to say, has gotten a bit rusty over the last few years. My brain's kind of gotten taken over by French. And I knew how to say my question, like, what time is it? But I couldn't understand the answer. So she dipped her finger in a glass of water and wrote the time on the counter for me so I knew what time it was. And I was like, okay, I really should have reviewed my numbers before I came on this trip. And so for you, within your language journey, what has been the most helpful for improving your listening comprehension?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, watching TV.
Mm.
It's a great passive way to start listening a language. And by passive, I don't mean that your brain checks out, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
brain is actively still listening, trying to understand the context of what's being spoken. but it's passive in the sense of you're not expected to add to the conversation. No one's going to ask you a question out of the blue, right? You can just sit back, relax, and train your brain. And honestly, remove the stress that sometimes gets tied up in conversation, live conversation.
Yeah, and try short episodes. Maybe one of those half an hour episodes that after the commercials, it's only about 20 minutes. The Simpsons is a great one. It's very culturally relevant for people wanting to see some American culture. I know that for my husband, when he was learning English, because he's a French speaker, he really loved that 70s show. It's not on anymore, but I'm sure you can go and find it because it's just really funny. It's light, it's lighthearted, and it's not a big deal if you don't catch every single line or understand every single word. You can still get the idea of the plot. So my question for you, Erin, though, is this $20,000 question, right?
Mm-hmm.
With or without subtitles?
Yes. In the beginning, with, but make sure to put the subtitles in the language that you're learning. So if you're watching a Spanish show, put it in Spanish, right? Don't put the subtitles in your native language because you're actually not training your brain to communicate, you're training your brain to translate.
Yeah, it's true.
And eventually, once you get more confident in your listening skills, you can train your brain to wean itself off of the subtitles completely.
And how do you do that?
Well, I like to keep the TV on, but you could go into another room where you hear just the sound, and you can see if you can figure out what's going on just by listening. I actually like to put it on my phone, like watch something on my phone and connect to my Bluetooth speakers. So it's like right in my ears. I don't have any other like ambient noises happening around me that can distract from what's being said. And then I can just check back on my phone. Like if I'm doing the dishes, I can just look back on my phone and say, oh, okay, what I think is happening is actually happening, right?
Yeah, that's such great advice. Like just to go and check in when you have the show on your phone right beside you. Check in every once in a while. Like, is it really what I think is happening?
Yeah, and honestly, it can be good for a show that maybe you've already seen before. Maybe you watched it once or watched this episode once with subtitles, and now you just want to practice listening to what's being said. You can re-listen to the episode. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe like a movie that you love, that you've watched so many times in your native language. Just like switch it over because you don't have to pay attention to the plot, what's going on. You can really pay attention to the words, and you can maybe even watch it for the first time in the language it was made in, which is always fun to hear the actors' real voices.
I remember my my college roommate watched Pirates of the Caribbean with me in English for the first time, and she had only heard Johnny Depp speak in French. And so she's like, wait, that's what he sounds like? This is so weird. But honestly, I have another bit of advice too, and it goes for reading as well, which we'll talk about in a second. But try to find a book or a TV show or a movie that's in a genre that you like. So, for example, I love mystery novels, adventure, detective shows. So, whenever I learn a new language, I try to find something in that genre, whether it's a book or a movie or a TV show. And this helps for two reasons. So, number one, I already know a lot about these types of shows and about these types of books. So I'm familiar how the typical story plays out, right? Yeah. I'm also familiar with typical vocab that gets used in these genres. So I know that a lot of that knowledge is going to transfer easily over to the language that I'm learning. And then number two, I already know I'm going to like the show because I like this type of genre, right? So it's more likely that I will stay consistent and stay invested.
Yeah, for me, it would be like murder mysteries, and I have to stay way far away from rom-coms because I cannot even handle them in my native language of English.
I honestly love a good rom-com and cheesy ones too. They're good. So I don't know, maybe we can't watch TV together, Sarah.
No, what are we going to choose? We need to find like where our Venn diagrams match. So now that we talked about the oral part of language, the speaking, the listening, what do you recommend for the written word, Erin? So, like, if you were talking about reading, for example.
Yeah, honestly, same thing as speaking. Just read, read, read. Because it is honestly the best way to gain new vocabulary.
I agree with you completely.
And I also find that it helps to read short texts so that you can dig deep into the story, dig deep into the words, right? And again, I always choose things that I'm interested in, such as mystery, adventure, romance,
Mhm.
And since it's short, I can read it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times,
Mhm.
And since I care about the subject, it's fine that I'm rereading it, right? I
Mhm.
already like it. But the first time that I read and the first time that you read, make sure that you just skim, get all the way through the chapter or the section, and just go across the surface of the text. You can read it once through without stopping, and then ask yourself at the end just the one simple question: what is this about?
Yeah, like I wouldn't get into like a 300-page book. Like often I tell clients do like a 1-page article so you can go through those 3 times. So the first time skim, go right across the surface. And then the second time I recommend scanning. So that's when you really get into the words and the vocabulary that's being used in this text. And I look, first of all, for some new words, some new expressions I don't know. And if I can, if it's on a piece of paper, I circle these new words. And I choose, or I tell my clients to choose only the ones that are important to understanding the text. Like, don't get bogged down with lots of vocabulary words. Choose 10 words per text, max 10. More than that, your brain just can't assimilate them. It's too much. Then look up those 10 words in a dictionary. It can be an online dictionary. There's so many. There's one called dictionary.com. It's so easy to remember. Look them up in a dictionary, especially one that's made for language learners, because the definitions will be easy to understand and also show how they're used. And if it's an object, they'll actually show you a picture of it. So it's really helpful. I really like the Longman's Wordwise. They even have an online version that's free. And unless you're a true beginner, don't translate the words, because then again your brain will stay in your native language and it will translate instead of actually learning to use your second language.
And most importantly, write these words down in a real notebook.
Real live notebook.
Actually write it down with a pen or a pencil in your hand, right? Instead of typing it onto a screen, because it'll help your brain to process this new information. And it engages more of the senses, especially touch. You're holding that pen in your hand, you're feeling the movement of the words, right? And it's making that connection into your brain, the visual, the audio parts of your brain, and
even
the movement side.
The smell of the page, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like making these connections that you wouldn't have on a computer, right? And then for words that I really want to memorize, I add them to like my little mini ring of flashcards here. I have a bunch of them like hanging up beside me off camera. It's like Tagalog, Spanish, French.
You're such a geek, but it's so cute. I remember like when I was learning French, like going around and putting little index cards on things, curtain, and like I'd be like rideau, and then I would tape them to things in bathtub and toilet and kitchen cabinet, and I would learn all these words in French that way, like armoire, fenêtre.
Yeah.
Okay. So then you get to this third time. So you went through skimming, then scanning, and you wrote down your words in your vocabulary notebook. Then you go through the third time. And this is when you can really understand the text and engage with it fully. Maybe you won't understand every word, maybe not every idea, but you get the main idea. What is the subject? What is it talking about? And what did I learn? And do I agree with what the writer wrote? Maybe I don't really agree, or maybe I would add something to it. Or maybe I was like, that part there wasn't a really great argument. I would have argued it differently. So that's when you know you've really understood a text. So skim, scan, understand.
I love that. Skim, scan, understand. All right. So now the other side of writing is the other side of reading is writing. I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Well, it's the same side. It's the other side of the coin. It's the same coin. Yeah. So most of the time when we're writing in our second language, it's for emails, right?
Exactly. Millions and millions of emails. If only I could empty out my inbox, right?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I cannot handle. Like, whenever I go on vacation, I'm like, was it worth it? Because now I have like a week to get through the week of being on vacation. I just cannot handle it. And I'm like, was it even worth leaving and turning off my email during a week? It's so overwhelming.
But you have new experiences, new memories that you can add, right? I think it evens it out.
And then I have to handle my email when I get back. But when I write in French, like I often have to write emails in French, and it just takes more time. I have to think harder, even though I've been living in French for 20 years. It's a little harder, right? And I have to like think, are my adjectives accorded with my verbs? Are they conjugated correctly? And again, Gmail helps me out. It gives me a great spell checker. It knows what mistakes I've made. But I actually have to learn from those corrections if I want to learn. Like, I have to actually figure out why I made that mistake and how not to make it again. So it's like I have to think through, why is this little word, this squiggly line under this word? What's wrong? And then figure it out.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the best way to do that is to talk to a native speaker, right? But if you don't have access to them and you can't use them all the time for your emails, right? Then tools like Antidote, I downloaded that one onto my browser, and it corrects me in English and French. And there's this new tool that they just added on Antidote that actually gives you options like different ways to rephrase what you wrote, and you can like read through them and choose them which ones sound good, and then it always gives you the reasons why, like why grammatically do I need to change this, what does this vocab word mean that I'm adding into my text. So
oh, very cool. Once again, we are not sponsored by Antidote. We just find a very good tool.
Just happens to be a really good tool that I use. And it prevents me from sounding like a child when I'm writing to professional entrepreneurs, Yeah.
I just want to get my ideas across as a credible adult.
Yeah.
And we're so lucky that we have these AI tools like Antidote and my Google spell checker. But we also have to be careful not to become too reliant on these tools and be able to figure out why we need to change something so that we can actually improve and start being able to write on our own and be able to express ourselves fully without being reliant on tools, just so that our brains can start to understand the language, that we can start to speak it. Because speaking, even though we spoke about it first, is actually the hardest thing. It's pretty much the last thing we're able to do well is speak. And it's based on if we're able to write and read and understand, then, and if we do it well and we create the right habits of doing that and not skipping steps or taking shortcuts, then we'll be able to speak really well.
Yeah. And all of these tips and tricks, keep them in mind, but we're going to talk about them again more next week, but specifically go into tools that we can use to put these tips and tricks into practice. So you'll be able to practice them more, and we'll be able to practice them together next time.
Oh, so, I can't wait!
Yeah, I'm excited. Oh, I guess it means that's time to go.
Sad but true. Remember to write down these 3 expressions that we used today. Make a mistake, wean off, figure out. Actually, I used figure out a lot today, I remember. Make a mistake, wean off, figure out. We'll provide the correct definitions at the last episode of the season with all the words we've covered. So write them down in that vocabulary notebook, write down the definitions. You can look them up in the dictionary and get ready so at the end you're able to do that crossword.
Yep. And so if you didn't catch them this time, yeah, like Sarah said, you can go back and listen to them again, go back to listen to this episode. And if you don't have a vocabulary notebook already, we've actually created one especially for language learners. So you can go and check it out in our boutique, and the link is in the show notes.
Yeah, so it's time to say goodbye. See you next week. Same time, same place.
Mm-hmm. Signing off from Montreal. Nos vemos. Hi, everyone. Don't forget to check out our vocabulary notebook and other resources that you can find on our resources page. The link is in the show notes below. See you next time.